On the what side, it's pretty basic. Containment essentially is the separation of cool supply air and hot exhaust air from the IT equipment. And as you can see in the diagram on the left, without containment, you have cool air coming up through your perforated tiles if you have a raised floor environment. You have hot air coming out of the back of the racks that's produced by the IT equipment in the racks. And as a result, if you don't have containment, you'll end up with a very high level of mixing of airflow within that space. There's a number of negatives coming out of that. The first one being, of course, that if the hot air is coming back around to the front of the racks, you're getting a higher airflow temperature, higher air inlet temperature than what could be desirable for your IT equipment, which eventually could lead to high temp alarms on the IT equipment, or could actually lead to potentially failure of the IT equipment. Another major drawback without having containment is the fact that your return airflow to your crack units or your cooling systems can be much lower, which reduces the efficiency of the cooling system, which in turn means that it takes more energy to produce the cooling for those sites. So it can have a definite impact on the energy efficiency of your cooling systems. Basic containment, of course, every data center should have blanking panels in place. That is, I refer to that as the most basic form of containment. And without blanking panels, the situation of air mixing and high air temperature going into your IT equipment is even greater. So every data center should have basic containment, and as I say, that's blanking panels to start with.
Arnold, I would add that sealing the floor goes hand in hand, that first level of blanking cabinets, but also sealing the floor. And I'm sure many of you recall the days when you had a 6-inch by 8-inch hole in the rear of your rack on the floor and just blowing cold air into the hot aisle.
Yeah, very true. I mean, you bring to mind a site that we were in recently where when we go into a site and do the audit, part of what we do is measuring the airflow coming out of the perforated tiles relative to the amount of airflow that's being provided by the cooling units. And it's not unusual to do our measurements, and when we do the calculations and tally it up, we find that there's 65% less air coming up through the perforated tiles than what's being provided by the cooling units. So that's, to your point, Carrie, that means that there's a lot of air coming up through the floor and other places rather than perforated tiles. Some quite good data centers we've been in, we've seen that percentage of airflow coming up through the perforated tiles relative to what's being supplied as high as 90%. So in those cases, those data center operators have done a really good job of containing the airflow, and it makes a big difference within the data center.